What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben and welcome back to the bench for another episode of our 1/48 scale Airfix Seafire FR 47 that we're building for the HLI Korean War group build. Today we're going to go ahead and jump into the resin parts. That's our main focus for today. So let's grab that kit. Let's go ahead and start having some fun. I've never actually used this type of resin before, so I'm not really sure how this is going to go together. If we take our time, we go bit by bit, section by section, I think we can probably get this to work, and I'm really excited to see how it comes together. Though do keep in mind that if you go out and you pick up this particular model kit, don't feel the need to rush out and buy a whole bunch of resin parts. The kit parts are actually not too terrible. Yeah, a little bit of scratch building would do wonders for this kit, but since we have the resin parts, we're not going to do much scratch building. We're just going to run with the resin and see what we can do. Now looking through the parts and pieces, it looks like we start off with removing the details here off of the fuselage here in the kit. So that's our first main goal. We're going to come in here with some jeweler files, some sandpaper, maybe a Dremel. I know a couple of subscribers have mentioned to go ahead and try to thin out the plastic as much as possible and also to thin out the resin parts as well. Otherwise, you have these really thick resin parts glued onto the inside of a really thick fuselage and it just kind of dwarfs everything on the inside. So we're going to go ahead and take these parts here, we're going to clean them up, thin them out, and I'm hoping that should be sufficient enough to get this thing looking a little bit more detailed. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. We're going to probably use an assortment of jeweler files, sandpaper, Dremel, and different Dremel bits, and we're just going to hope for the best here, to be honest. Now the detail isn't terrible here, but if you compare it to the resin set that we have here as well from Aries, there is not much of a comparison. The resin is super clean, very, very detailed. We will have to come in and kind of sand down the backings of these to make them a little bit thinner, but you can see just how much detail we're going to gain here in this particular model. So I think it's going to be a fun experiment. Remember, it is resin, so make sure if you're going to go ahead and grab one of these, get a respirator going because I hear the dust is toxic, so you don't want to be breathing that in for sure. So we're going to start up the first time lapse, guys. I want to remove all that detail. We've got our jeweler files, of course. We've got our sandpaper, our Dremel. We're going to remove all of those areas, all that detail right there. And then we're going to go ahead and clean up the parts, thin down the sidewalls, thin out the resin parts. And I'm hoping that this goes really, really well here. So let's go ahead and jump in. Let's have some fun. Let's see what we can do. right, everybody, so we are back, and so far so good. We've worked quite a bit here on the resin parts, and I'm very happy with how they've turned out. We need to come in and do a little bit of fine tuning and a bit of cleanup here with our jeweler files, but once we kind of get this all squared away, I think we'll be ready to go ahead and glue these down to the fuselage sidewalls. Speaking of the fuselage, I will say that trying to sand off all that detail, even though it wasn't a lot of detail, was still very, very time consuming. I just couldn't position the Dremel with any of my bits that I have in any particular way, though that it actually feels comfortable grinding down and sanding off all that internal detail. Jeweler files as well, even though I love those, they just don't really want to bend or fit with the contours of the fuselage. It just doesn't really go. You have to kind of bend the laws of physics to get these things in here. But we've actually been able to sand down the majority of details. We actually have the fuselage parts a lot thinner than they were before. Unfortunately, I did end up gouging the plastic just a tiny bit with my Dremel and the different sanding drums and grinding wheels that I used. But honestly, they're going to be covered with the resin parts, so you know what? It's fine. You're going to cover them up. They're not going to be seen. So luckily for me, it doesn't really matter. Now, I will say that it's very difficult to bring everything down evenly so that everything kind of matches up perfectly and the resin contours exactly the same as a fuselage and you don't have any sort of gaps and all that. I've been really struggling with that. So unfortunately, we have a couple of gaps here and there we need to go ahead and fix. But again, we're going to jump into a time lapse. We're going to go ahead and get the resin finished off and installed. Then we're going to come in, we're going to fix up some of the other parts like the seat backing, instrument panel, all that good stuff. And then I want to go ahead and go over to the fuselage and drill out some of those windows for the different cameras. Those have to be drilled out and cleaned up. And lastly, with my razor saw and cut out the cowling, go ahead and get that ready for the resin installation. So let's jump back into that time lapse, guys, see what we can do, get the resin installed, and hopefully, fingers crossed, this looks pretty cool. All right, let's keep it going. Alright everybody, so we are back and I have actually gotten all the resin parts glued into the fuselage, and the detail is pretty stunning, I have to say. Very, very nicely detailed, so I'm happy with that. Now unfortunately I did lose a couple of different parts and pieces. I actually broke a little section off, so I'm going to have to replace that with some styrene. But for the most part, yeah, it's actually not terrible. One area got a little bit too thin, so you can see the fuselage behind it, but we can go ahead and finish that up, paint that over, you're not going to notice it. A little bit of a gap here as well. I did come back in, of course, and drill out all of the camera windows for both the right and left side of the fuselage and the undersurface as well right here. That unfortunately didn't go as well as I would like it to have because for some reason the holes were a little bit kind of askew on the fuselage. So it actually came out not so round as it came out somewhat egg-shaped. Of course, I have some seams here in the cockpit fuselage by the entryway hatch, but that does bring me to the front cowling, and I've run into a major issue with this cowling insert. As you can see here, I've cut out the plastic parts, and when I go back in to go ahead and fit this resin insert here for the cowling, we got some major fit issues. Let me go ahead and show you in detail here. As you can see, we got everything cleaned up, cleared out. So when we go ahead and install this resin insert, if we have this all the way where it's supposed to be touching the rear portion of the fuselage, we have a giant step in the very front of the cowling. If we go ahead and slide this forward and make the front end flush, we have a huge gap in the rear right by the fuel tank where the cowling meets the fuselage. It is absolutely gigantic. So that's going to be really, really difficult to fill. And then of course rescribe and the whole thing. So I'm not exactly happy about that. Other than that though, as you can see, the detail here looks pretty decent. I like that. It's going to really pop once we go ahead and start doing some painting. And of course we've got other parts and pieces like the seat backing, the armor plate there for the seat. That looks pretty cool. And then of course we've got our headrest and our seat attachment point right here as well, which we went ahead and installed. The problem we're having now is I can't really install the seat onto that seat backing because we're missing two of our locating tabs. Those have been broken off probably from just years of this resin set being kind of tossed around in a box. So we don't have those locating tabs. We're going to have to either scratch build them or figure out what to do with that because that's going to make the seat installation very difficult to do. But again, it is a resin set and I did buy the second hand, so I'm not surprised that we've got some broken parts. Now that's actually the complete opposite here when we talk about the instrument panel because this thing fits up inside just beautifully. There's actually no gap, there's no issue, there's no wiggle room. It's nice, snug, and it just slides right up inside the fuselage. So I'm actually very happy with that. That went over beautifully. So there shouldn't be any problem with installing the photo etch, installing all of the different parts and pieces and the gauges, and that should be able to be locked into place, and I think we should be decent there. Now I should mention that I did buy this kit secondhand, so as I was going through and checking out all the different resin parts, I noticed that we are missing a section here in our cockpit. So unfortunately we're missing the entire lower section of the cockpit. So no cockpit tub, which is going to make installation of not only the flight control stick, but also the rudder pedals, very, very difficult to go ahead and get installed. We're going to have to kind of think about that and figure out what to do because we can't really install the headrest or the footwell there for the rudder pedals or any of that stuff without that cockpit tub. We're going to have to maybe do some scratch building or just kind of get in there and figure out a way that we can hopefully get this thing together. But other than that, we do have our different resin parts glued in. I'm actually really liking how the kit is going together, even though it is giving me a little bit of hassle. So far, the resin does look beautiful. The detail is impeccable. I really like how these parts appear, but the fit issues are going to be a little troublesome. Cowling and all that, just kind of fitting everything together. That's future Ben's problem. We're done for today. I'm going to go ahead and call it quits for now. So until our next episode, guys, you know the drill. Go out there, get yourself some bench time, have some fun, build something cool. Make sure to go check out HobbyLink International and all of their group builds. They have some great stuff going on over there, and we will see you back here on episode 3 of our Korean War group build Seafire FR 47. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.